Well, let's get this party started then. Hi everyone, welcome. I'm Jocelyn Maffin. I work with Spinal Cord Injury BC, and we're extremely proud and uh, happy to be part of this, I guess, storytelling, writing, and reading festival of sorts, and in particular to recognize the work of several of our members who have written some amazing works lately. So I'm here just to welcome everyone and thank our partners at the Disability Foundation as well for your involvement and encouragement on this session. And just to give you a quick overview, I'm going to wrap up my welcome pretty quick here, and then we're going to go right into a panel with our three authors, facilitated by Emily Gillespie. And then at 6:30, we'll start the writing workshop with Lisa Hislop. So that's sort of our main agenda. And we had a little chat about how we want to handle questions. Of course, the panel is an excellent time to share your questions. We're going to give each author 10 minutes to talk about their book and how they came to write it, etc. And we have some questions prepared, but we really welcome questions from our audience. And you can, we ask that if you have a question, you could type it in the chat. You could use the raise hand feature. If either of those are difficult, you can wait for a lull and speak out your question if you're unmuted. So if it gets chaotic, we might just ask everyone to raise their hand, but let's give that one a try first. So I'm going to first do a land acknowledgement. We acknowledge that our work takes place on the territories of Indigenous peoples who have lived on and cared for the land for time immemorial. Spinal Cord Injury BC is located on the traditional and ancestral territory of the Coast Salish people, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, Musqueam, and Lekwungen First Nations. Our Prince George Regional Office is on the territory of the Lheidoltene Nation. I'm grateful to join today from the traditional territory of the Snuneymuxw and Snanawas First Nations in Nanaimo, BC, on this cold and rainy day, which seems like a kind of a perfect day to talk about writing, reading, and stories. So I just want to hand it over to and introduce Emily Gillespie. Emily is a mad and autistic author, disability activist, and I love this part, professional daydreamer. Emily enjoys working in community spaces and examining individual and collective experiences, and in her spare time enjoys reading, walking, dancing, swimming, and people watching, and is the author of 2 books, Dancing with Ghosts, and a recent title, Mighty, an anthology of disabled superheroes, which I have got to read. I'm going to hand it over to you.
Hi, just a heads up, I'm having a bit of computer problems, so if I freeze and disappear, it seems like a pretty chill day, so someone might have to take over. So sorry about that, but life and technology. So welcome. So we have 3 authors today. So the first person is Keiko. Keiko Honda is a scientist, writer, community organizer, and painter. She holds a PhD in international community health from New York University, but when she suddenly contracted a rare autoimmune disease that confined her to a wheelchair for life, she had to leave her career in research at Columbia University in New York. After moving to Vancouver in 2009, Keiko started hosting artist salons, for which she was awarded the City of Vancouver's Remarkable Woman Award in 2014. Shortly thereafter, she founded the Vancouver Arts Colloquium Society to bridge generations and cultures through the arts and to offer members of marginalized communities in Vancouver opportunities for artistic self-discovery. She teaches aesthetics of co-creation in the liberal arts and a 55 plus program at Simon Fraser University. Welcome, and we can't wait to listen to you. Next up, we have Mary-Jo. Mary-Jo is a yoga teacher, therapist, and best life and mindfulness coach. She began a formal training in yoga in the mid 1980s while studying psychology at the University of Waterloo. In 1996, after massage school, she went on to become certified in the field of energy anatomy. Mary-Jo teaches yoga, mindfulness, and adaptive accessible yoga. She loves to sail, garden, mountain bike, and hang out with her two amazing daughters, friends, and family, making and enjoying great meals together. Mary-Jo is the author of Where Science Meets Spirit, the autobiography of a paralyzed yogi. Thank you so much for being here. And lastly, we have Linda. Linda McGowan is a writer, world traveler, nurse, advocate for accessibility. She has touched every continent, wow, traveling to more than 180 countries in the last 30 years. Linda does not allow mobilizing in a wheelchair to be a deterrent to her adventures around the globe. She's a longtime volunteer at MS Society's campaign representative and has been published in various magazines. Linda is a nurse with over 40 years in community health, focusing on palliative care and accessibility. In addition to traveling and writing, Linda enjoys spending time with family and friends. Linda believes that with enough time and patience, solutions can be found. I'd like to welcome all three of you, and I can't wait. After reading these bios, when I was sent this today, I was like, oh, I can't wait to hear this. So turning it over to the three of you, welcome, and floor is yours.
Go ahead, Keiko, you're first.
Okay, I'm the first. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here. My name is Keiko Honda. My book is a transformative journey from the academic world to the world of arts and community, and also from able-bodied to wheelchair user. It's a narrative of creation upon creation. Before I read some excerpt, I would like readers to explore the symbolism of the title, The Accidental Blooms. When you flip through the pages, you will see many of my watercolor paintings. I began paintings, writing concurrently over the past 4 to 5 years, making this more than an autobiography. It's a record of my dialogue with watercolor. The title was inspired by the so-called cauliflower effect, a common phenomenon among watercolor beginners. Anyone heard of it? When watercolors of different consistencies mingle, they can instantly form unpredictable and some chaotic patterns like shape of cauliflower. And initially, I viewed those accidental formations as nothing more than mistakes. But then one day I found myself gazing at those oddly shaped blobs. A strange sense of familiarity washed over me, as if I were looking distant reflection of myself. And what I mean by that is moving from Japan to New York and then to Vancouver, I was immersed in a vastly different culture of language, culture, and climate. And those cultural shift or change was unpredictable and vibrant, just like cauliflowers in my watercolor. And then when I came down with transverse myelitis, acute inflammation of the spinal cord, which confined me into wheelchair at the age of 39, the significance of those accidental blooms deepened. They became to symbolize the life's uncertainties, the beauty that can arise from uncertainty or adversity, and the unexpected strengths we all possess. So that's why this title, Accidental Blooms. Without watercoloring, I would never discover that metaphor. So in short, I feel really compelled to write and paint as a record of documenting the evolution of my thinking, attempting to make sense of it all. I firmly believe in self-reflection And primarily, I would say the message of this book is that we are continuously shaping our future particularly through our direct sensory and bodily experience. So I'd like to read three brief excerpts. The moment of despair, moment of revelation, and moment of change or transformations.
This is Mary-Jo's workshop, but I missed her already. She was first. I'm missing my column of folders.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
You need it right now?
Yeah.
Agasha, do you want to mute? Yeah, there we go.
Thank you. Okay, so the first one that I'm going to read is the day after I arrive at ER. The resident diagnosed me with idiopathic transverse myelitis. The morning after I arrive at the ER, transverse myelitis is an inflammation of spinal cord, typically characterized by paralysis, in my case from the chest down. In a soft but desperate voice, I asked if he could bring me copies of all the published articles on transverse myelitis. I urgently wanted to know what I was up against and whether there were any hope for potential cure. He brought me about 30 peer-reviewed articles. I couldn't sleep because severe pain and high-dose intravenous steroid kept me awake, and I read them all in a day. Reading those articles was not a pleasant crystal ball. It was more like misfortune teller. There were no cures on the horizons for transverse myelitis. I kept searching feverishly for any sliver of hope, but there was nothing. Since the incidence of transverse myelitis was so rare, there had never been any clinical trials. The information on the prognosis was likewise slim due to the small sample size. Most published case studies I read were followed up for only 6 months, though a handful were extended for a few years. One paper documented an increased rate of depression among patients in the second year. Oh, great, I thought. I have to watch out for that too. I had enough to handle as it was. Losing mobility was not something I had ever anticipated. Who does? The odds of contracting transverse myelitis were around 1 in a million each year, but suddenly I was that one, unable to walk for life. At that time, coming to terms with this felt like a form of death to me. Over 90% of my engagement with the world was ambient, not only in how I functioned as a wife and mother, but also in my feelings of enjoyment, beauty, and freedom. I could not even roll over on a hospital bed on my own now. I also felt like outcast, exiled to a joyless unknown world, pierced by a deep anxiety for the future. Could I care for my baby and continue with the job I had worked so hard to get? How would Maya grow up with a wheelchair-bound mom? How could I show Maya my ballet moves? I had a dream of taking a ballet class with Maya one day, as my mom and I used to do. Would I survive? Would life be worth living? My life seems to be over that day, December 11, 2006. So now I jump into the 4 years later, 2010, after I moved to Vancouver. As I was preparing to move to Vancouver, I began to worry that my wheelchair might create social barriers. In Manhattan, we had lived in a tall apartment building with an elevator that diminished physical barriers. I could visit my neighbors freely, even though Vancouver has reputation as the most accessible city in North America. We are moving to a detached house in a neighborhood populated by another detached houses, most of which were not wheelchair accessible, making it hard for me to visit my new neighbors. Could I get them to visit us? If I could solve this, Maya and I could be part of the living community again. In Japanese, the hard to translate word ikigai refers to an individual's sense of his or her life's purpose or chosen direction. My ikigai was evolving. I found myself giving priority to finding and forming human relationships. The new city came with a new routines. Every weekday, Maya and I would take a wheelchair-accessible bus to her preschool, and then I would sit and wait for her in a quiet cafe for 2 or 3 hours, reading books and newspapers. One day, in January 2010, I came across a short essay in the Globe and Mail called "I've Joined My Mother's Club" by Lori O'Harulam. The writer, a middle-aged daughter, was recalling childhood memories of her mother who had formed a little community by starting a book club. The daughter followed her mother's footsteps when she started her own book club as an adult, and it also grew into a small community, just as her mother's had. I was touched. I imagined my own grown-up daughter writing something similar someday. I promised myself I would give Maya a gift like this, the rich experience of a community whose values I fully understood. I brought the newspaper clipping home with me as a token of my promise. So right after this, I actually started my own artist culture salon, which continues to this date, and celebrated recently 169 sessions. So now I like to read the third short sections, um, which is a decade after the day of the year. And this part is actually written by my 11-year-old daughter after she attending the Salon 100. She wrote such a long essay, so I'm gonna only select this some portion. That's her voice. Moving forward in life, I now know that smart, creative, and genius comes in different forms, ideas, and skill set. There's no single form of intelligence. There's no standard to determine whether someone is intelligent or not. Everyone has amazing potential that they can explore and use. You just need to find it. Whether it's sports, art, drama, science, math, humanities, poetry, or activism, we all have something to offer, big or small. I've learned that it's not the actual bi-monthly salon that creates the sense of community. It's the long-lasting connections that carried on to later accomplish many wonderful things, powerful things. Ever since grade 4, neurology or neuropsychology has become my lifelong dream, but it would never stuck me if it weren't for the salon. The outside box thinking lets me get a glimpse into reality and allows me to dream big, since life is too short to dream small. When the inevitable drama of school kicks in, I always remember my dreams. Neurology, neuroscience, or neuropsychology, they all pretty much mean the same things. I can dig back into my first memories of the salon, my first exposure to this type of interaction. I feel peace, serenity, and most importantly, gratitude. Every person on this planet has a story. I'm beyond lucky to be able to hear a few of them. I remember when my mom did her own salon. Her presentation really made me think of what a life my mom has had and the way I was raised. Time and time again, I've learned that tragedy can strike any family at any time, but success is defined by how you react and overcome those adversities. I can say objectively and subjectively that my mom is one of the most resilient, optimistic, and brave people I know. She took the adversity and used it to become better, discover her real passion and optimism that the most out of what life gives you. That should be the definition of success, in my opinion. I see this in many other people who have presented and attended the salon. I've heard stories about illness, divorce, violence in hometowns, and aspiration and struggles for a certain career. Each one of these people told their story with such passion, thought, and optimism. With deep reflection, I conclude that the salon is the reason I am where I am, the cause of my diverse knowledge and my way to connect with adult world. The cultural salons foster awareness, connections, open discussions, and new friendships. Many people come and gather to come and share common goal to learn, teach, and share. I'm so lucky to be part of this experience, and I feel blessed knowing the people I know. For my mom, friends were everything when she didn't have family. Friends were the ones who encouraged, supported, motivated my mom to keep pushing the boundaries and to never give up. The salon was a way for my mom, to meet new people in the world that is isolating and polarizing itself. It was a way for her and me to learn people's stories and vice versa. The outcome of the salon is outstanding, and I think every community should have something like that. I hope the salon keeps attracting new minds as it continues throughout the years. My other 6. Thank you for listening. So the my daughter is now the second year of University of Toronto majoring in neuroscience, fulfilling her dreams from grade 6. And initially when I got paralyzed, I didn't know the reserves of my strengths. However, many people, including my daughter, have illuminated possibilities for me. And yes, my conclusion is really everything has its own time to ripen as long as we pay attention. So thank you so much for listening, and I'm here for any questions, feedback. Thank you.
Thanks, Keiko. Sorry, I was the timekeeper. I think it might make sense to go right to Mary-Jo.
Thanks, Jocelyn. Thanks, Keiko. So wonderful to hear and to hear your daughter's voice. So I have written a book called Where Science Meets Spirit, and the autobiography of a paralyzed yogi is the subtitle. And the reason I chose that title and what the book is really about is my journey, as many and most memoirs are, my story. And I don't profess to have any answers, but I just, I really, I think that any of us that makes it through this journey with the spinal cord injury will all have a story of some sort to tell about that journey. Initially in my book, in my author's note, I make a very bold statement that I'm going to refer to energy, God, spirit, divine, source, creator, life force, intelligence interchangeably, because I believe them all to be one and the same thing. And I kind of approach writing that way, and I approach science that way. As a student of psychology and sociology, I'm well aware of the split between science and spirit. And I lay kind of the groundwork for that down in the beginning of the book, just making a reference to kind of the Cartesian Descartes model that really separated the body and the mind, and that really carried through into science and medicine particularly. And a lot of what I unpack, perhaps in my own way, in the book is how I feel that that's a limited view, and that unless we can kind of look at all of the parts together, as Plato said, unless we only look at one piece, we're not really taking in the whole thing. And I think that for me, that was a really big piece, because initially I was 47 years old when I was paralyzed, and I lost everything from the neck down. At one point they thought I was vegetable because I had been left on the hill for quite a long time before I was rescued. And so during that time, I was using a yoga breath called Ujjayi breathing. And when I was transported many different ways from ambulance, helicopter, and airplane down to Vancouver, it was a number of hours before they got to me. So the damage was quite extensive initially. I had no movement below my neck. And so I feel like coming through that portal for me was a gift of understanding energy, and also how the mind and the body work together. Because at first, and I write about this in my book, I felt like I was quite dissociated from my body. I felt like I was bigger than the room, and had no borders to my body. And that's very common in any traumatic experience that I learned about later on. It's a little bit of disassociation, and it's a protective mechanism. But it really helps us to figure out kind of how to deal with what we have in front of us. And the primitive brain is kind of what does that. And so that was really curious to me that that happened. And I had had an out of body experience as a child. I had a very rare near-death experience, which wasn't very easy for me to understand at the time. I had come out of a coma after a number of days after falling from a very high roof. And again, the odd pieces that fell together after that, where I didn't have a scratch on my body, where I had been floating above it and then came into my body later, informed my concept of embodiment, I guess, if you will. And so that really informs my approach to the book, and my journey through that story was really I suppose iced with the addition of yoga and psychology. And yoga is sort of a psychology of the body and mind, if you will, because really that's what it delves into, is the relationship of consciousness and the body. And that was a really big piece for me as I reconstituted myself back into my physical body and tried to reclaim arms and hands and things that were deemed to be pretty much not available. I really drew on that sort of that interconnected relationship between the mind and the body in various different ways and through all sorts of different techniques.
Sorry, Mary-Jo,
Yeah.
I think that we probably want to move on to the next to Linda, and then we'll circle back for questions.
Sounds good.
If you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat if you're thinking of questions as folks are reading. Okay, Linda, you're up.
I'm Linda McGowan, and I wrote the book because I've traveled extensively throughout the world on every continent, probably more than 160 countries. And people said, just don't talk about it, write a book. So I did write the book. And it's called Traveling the World with MS. And I didn't title it. I was going to title it There Is a Way. But in fact, if the publisher agrees to publish it, you don't argue with what they're going to call it. I started traveling and carrying on is that when I ran my last marathon, I always thought that I couldn't run, very long without a marathon. I started to run around Burnaby Lake and
life stories aimed at all of the authors. Thank you so much, Keiko, Mary-Jo, and Linda.
Emily, it's Linda. One of the things we wanted to talk about is how we get published. And mine wasn't I had a hybrid publisher that did some online for me and I did some myself. And you still get those hybrid.
Do you want to explain to folks what hybrid publishing means?
Sure,
Just
the
in case they
hybrid.
don't know.
Yeah, the publisher, they gave me sketches of the book cover, but they also looked at all that IBM literary library stuff that's really difficult to do yourself. So they did all that. I did all the writing, and I had it proofed myself by somebody else. I had a professor at Douglas College who was involved in writing, and she proofed it for me. It's easy to proof yourself and then somebody print, but it's better to have somebody that you don't know proof it yourself. So I paid probably close to $6,000 to have mine published. But
yeah, I'll add to that. I did the hybrid model as well. I paid a little bit more than that for sure.
But mine was a long time ago.
Yeah, and I know Keiko published with a traditional publisher, and I think it's a really good topic to look at. There's so much to it, and I will say that buyer beware, because you're buying essentially the various different things that they're going to do. You do have a bit more control over your manuscript, possibly. But at the end of the day, the publishing process is still the same, and the ISBN numbers and all those various different things where they distribute the books is in their hands. And the one thing about the self-publishing hybrid model that I didn't love is that various different, they go through Ingram Booksellers, which is the North American sort of wholesale, but they don't, once they put it on that list, that's it. It's a done deal. They're not going to repropagate it into that list. So unless the publisher gets asked, unless the bookstore gets asked by people to carry the book, they probably wouldn't pick it up unless they were, looking into that type of area of genre. So anyway, that was my 2 cents for the publishing piece.
And Mary-Jo, I spent a lot of questions to publishers, but I guess we're in the era now that they do email self-publishing. They do it online. They don't publish hardcover or paperbacks books very much anymore.
Yeah.
So we're kind of at
Thank you both for that. And what I would say to the room is that if you ever do self-publish, they say the number one thing to invest in is a good editor. That's the one piece you need to definitely spend the money on. Yeah, thank you. So I have a question. I'm going off the script a bit here. But my day job is I work in mental health, and I'm always curious with my own writing life stories and other people. How did you set boundaries? Was there anything you decided was off limits? How did you kind of take care of yourself during this creative process and during the publication too, as your book came into the world? Like, how did you, were there any particular practices you had, boundaries, self-care practices for doing this exciting but personal work?
I think that's a really good question. I had a number of times that I was at the computer till 2 or 3 in the morning. Like I would stop when I had to go pee. Other than that, I keep going. And it's something that once you're out of good section, you just keep going. And it's probably not very good for your mind, body, and soul. It'd be better to. At the beginning, I was writing 2 hours a day. And I made sure I did 2 hours, but near the end, I was writing 6, 8 a day. My difficulty is when I started, I was working full time. So I was working full time and working on my book every day.
And I'll comment. I feel like I did much the same, although I did. I felt like I was doing a PhD, although I've never done one. But it just felt like there was piles of papers and books and research things all over my living room, and I couldn't see through the forest of paper sometimes. But the big thing is to just keep at it, and to set yourself up, like Linda said. Like I also was working. I work for SCI and I work at Rhodes downtown, and fitting the writing schedule in was really key to me staying on track and not burning out, I think. And so I had a schedule where I would have to, kind of fulfill that 2 hour minimum a day. At first it was just 1 hour. And I think that really helped me be able to set a boundary for the work, and also then to come away from it, get some fresh air, go out in my garden, and then get back to writing. Because I felt like the creative process was better when I was better. So that was mine.
Yeah, exactly.
I love how you put that. The creative process was better when you were better, and that time boundary. Thank you. Keiko, do you want to share anything?
I found that the writing was actually the form of therapy for me. And I really enjoy that struggling part, that to articulate exactly the way I wanted to say. And the struggling part itself was actually, I enjoy it. But one thing that really helps me is that to have friends who I can bounce sort of off ideas, or read aloud to someone else, and to get the feedback, or have a dialogue. Doesn't necessarily have to be necessarily always on editing, but to have a dialogue on it, I think that was really fruitful. Yeah, I approach not all the time intensely all the time. I just sometimes work intensely, but sometimes completely playful. It comes and goes. Yeah.
Thank you so
Yeah,
much for that.
Emily, I'd love to add to that because I think the process of reading your work out loud is really, really good, Keiko, and I agree 100%. And if you're writing something that has an emotional gradient, such as a memoir, as opposed to perhaps a fiction or a different genre, you really need that ability to kind of create some space between you and the topic. But maybe the struggle is good, as you say, because it gives more fodder for the writing. But it is good to read your work out loud. You hear it, and especially joining writing groups, or if you have, as you said, friends. I read it to my mom in her last days before she left this planet, and it was actually an incredibly fulfilling experience for both of us because my injury involved my family, so it was really neat in that way. So you'll find someone, and definitely a writing group. Like we could even start one here. I know Emily and both um, Lydia have that type of thing, but I think it's a really good thing to create a group of people where you can be accountable, and perhaps that might help you as well.
Thanks. And I love how my question about mental health expanded to larger pieces like the process and time boundaries and editing, which is all so relevant. Jocelyn, I'd love to hear your question.
Thank you. I'm really curious about how you found the narrative in your, like, what separated it from being an autobiography to a memoir, like how you found the central story in the part that you were going to share. And in that, I wanted to recognize Bonnie Klein, who has written Slow Dance, and it was one of the first disability memoirs I read.
Yeah.
And I always really loved that one. And now I have a whole collection, mostly because of Bonnie. And the thing that I always come up against when I read really good memoirs in general, or disability memoirs in particular, is how do you separate out a manageable narrative that is accessible to someone who might not share your lived experience, but also like true enough of a piece to like be satisfying for you, to any of the authors?
Such a
Marilyn,
great
I
question.
think, Jocelyn, I think you can run into problems. And that I did some of my traveling, and I did lots alone, but my friend Bill, who's just a traveler, he said, I can't read your book. He said, I cannot read it because I know what's coming. So he just, I did a chapter on him, like Friendship to Last Lifetime. He said, I can't read it. He said, I have it, I gave it away, but I can't read it because he knows what's coming.
Yeah. I mean, I've had that comment too. A couple people will go like, "Oh, I just got through the first 3 chapters, and it's
Yeah, it's too much.
too addicting." And I think there's that, to get to the point of the question, as an author, you're continually trying to find your voice and a narrative that will, I think, encompass the challenges, the difficulties, and also the devastation to a certain degree. And there's, in any writing, there's a curve, there's an arc. And so I think initially, you may have a very introductory kind of piece, and then that's going to move into a bit of a deeper emotional gradient for the reader. And it might get pretty intense toward that climax, that first climax point. And then, it's going to kind of move into anecdotal stories, which I think was kind of how I approached it. I knew the first bit was I'm gonna just throw it in there and talk about how crazy and difficult it was to become instantly paralyzed, and then move to kind of the funny, quirky little things that happen in the hospital or through recovery, and then start to pull from that more of the voice, and with a bit of distance, so that there is the ability to, I think, not only engage the reader through the emotional gradient, but to keep it interesting and relevant for not just someone who might have gone through a spinal cord injury. If that makes sense.
And Mary-Jo, I was going to say the hardest part was end.
Oh, yeah.
wasn't hard to begin it and do the middle, but it was hard to end it. Like, where do I end it? Because since then I've done a fair bit of traveling. I've been to Calabatar, which is 1,700 feet above base camp in Everest, and I've been on the Camino Santiago, and I've been to Russia, and I've been to South America, but and Antarctica, but I don't know how you end it.
So we have one final question before we wrap up. Okay, hi Roderick. He's been in some of my writing groups. So great question. I'd love to hear from all three of you. How long did it take each of you to write your books from rough draft to edited work and finally to being published? So what's this timeline look like? I know some of you hinted at this timeline.
So I'll jump in as soon as it's empty. It took me 6 years to actually write it. However, the caveat to that is I started writing it probably when I was injured. I had quite a large following of yogi people and just in general, and my website. And so I would dictate to my daughter what my experience was, and she would write that down. And those became weblogs, which I actually have kept in their original form throughout the book. And then when I decided to get serious about writing it, 6 years was kind of the process that it took. And then the final 2 years was grueling, as Bonnie will know. Bonnie held my hand through most of that. Thank you, Bonnie. And that really is like Linda said, it's probably the hardest part, because you're trying to figure out how to end it, how to pull it all together, how to bring it all into some cohesive framework. So that was my experience.
Yeah,
Thank
Mary-Jo,
you.
I'd say the same thing, that I started slowly because I was working full time and sitting on 2 boards of directors, and I was up till 2 and 3 in the morning. And after that, I just decided that writing the book was more important. And so in a year and a half or 2 years, then I went from a third written to the rest of it written.
Canceled the Netflix accounts, all that stuff, right, Linda?
Oh, I never had one. But
I did. I canceled all my social accounts pretty much for that time.
I was just really lucky in that I did much of my traveling before there were cell phones. So I used to write my dad fairly detailed letters about where I was and what I was doing, and he kept them all. So when I'm back to write my book, he sent me all the letters that had, experiences that I could feed onto to write my book. I mean, it was just a blessing that he did. I said, I've kept every letter you sent. See those?
Well, that letter collection's amazing. Wow.
I know. And it's, it tells us stuff like, we got to Greece on a Friday night at 5 o'clock and no place to stay in Athens. Well, how do you deal with that in a wheelchair? Get on the phone and just ask around. You used to travel with the Lonely Planet guidebook. Now it's online.
I started it right before the COVID, toward the end of 2019, and my writing period really coincided during the COVID. It took me from start to finish 3 years, and editing, the intense editing part with the editor was the last 3 to 4 months or so. Yes. But my process is normally I usually write the rough draft, which is way far from the final product. It's really more spontaneous writing, and I won't edit until I accumulate certain stories, and then I will start seeing some threads of themes.
Keiko, did you find that I had to proof from a hard copy? I can't proof from so I said to my son, I said, Patrick, I've got to proof from hard copy. He said, Mom, everybody your generation has to proof from a hard copy. He said,
Hey, me too. I'm younger.
Yeah.
I print everything.
Yeah, it changes everything. I don't know how many, I've got a laser printer. I don't know how many toners I got, how many chunks of letter, but I was way more efficient to do it 1.5 and proof it from there.
I'm gonna wrap us up here. Thank you, all three of you, for sharing your stories, your process, your vision, insight about the publishing process. These are all interesting work.